What are you doing? Don't we have an episode to record? Get up, come on. Stop being sad.
What's the point? Everyone knows Pong was the first video game ever.
What? We've already gone over games older than that. How can Pong be the first video game?
You mean Pong isn't the first video game ever?
No, it's not. Remember Computer Space?
Yeah?
That came out before Pong.
So, Computer Space is the first video game ever.
No! Ugh. Okay, how about this? Let's start from Pong and just make our way backwards to the first video game ever.
Sounds good to me. Pong, i.e. the game everyone thinks is the first video game ever, it's not really the first video game ever. Pong released in 1972, with Home Pong soon following in 1973. The game was fairly simple. Try to get the ball past your opponent.
Next up is Computer Space. Computer Space came out in 1971, just before Pong. We've actually already covered this game as well. Computer Space had you take on 2 other ships. It also made very loud and annoying noises.
Okay, according to new information we got from the Atari Museum, Computer Space was actually based off of Space War, which is another game we've already taken a look at. Space War came out in 1962 and was made by Steve Russell in collaboration with members of the MIT Tech Model Railroad Club. As we said in episode 1, this game had you and another player orbiting the sun, trying to take each other out.
According to the book High Score, The Illustrated History of Electronic Games, there was also another game released in 1971 that was inspired by Space War. It was called Galaxy Game. Seriously. The game is so similar to Space War that it should be said that the footage you're seeing now is not from Space War, but Galaxy Game. Now it's a great time to talk about The Thing.
The Thing?
Yes, The Thing.
That thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about The Thing.
It's important we mention this particular game, as it's a big reason why people believe Pong was the first ever video game. The name of the game is Tennis for Two. It was created in 1958. This is one of the earliest video games. It had you and another player playing tennis on a court viewed from the side. The game rendered its graphics on an oscilloscope, which is typically used to check circuitry and troubleshoot electronic equipment. The game was very advanced for its time. However,
it's not the first video game ever. There were several video games created before it in the 1950s. We don't have time to cover all the aspects of these games, so this part will not be very in-depth.
Yep. So, what was the first game?
First, let's start off with Nimrod and Tic-Tac-Toe. Both of these games were made back in 1951. Tic-Tac-Toe was created at Cambridge University in Britain. It is one of the earliest video games ever. Similar to Tennis for Two, the computer it ran on also used vacuum tubes.
Nimrod was a game where you played against the computer in a game of Nim. In Nim, there are piles of tokens, which each player takes turns taking tokens from. The player who takes the last token wins. Alternatively, you can play where the person who is forced to take the last token loses. Once again, very advanced for its time.
Now, before we move on to what we believe is the first video game ever, there are 2 things that need to be covered.
The first thing is a patent filed in 1947. This patent was filed by Thomas T. Goldsmith. It's for a very simple game meant to simulate firing missiles. Since we only have a patent and no physical game, however, we can't really say this is the first video game ever, though the possibility is high that this game does exist somewhere right now.
Now, the second point is this. I had to include this because I know if I didn't include this, someone on the internet would complain and say, "Human, that's not the first video game ever. The first video game ever came out in 1913, blah, 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 blah." Okay, let me say this. This is not a video game. What you are looking at now is from the British magazine The Sphere from July 26, 1913. Now, I can't say too much about this product, as there's not much info known. It seems someone would operate the screen while players used a light gun to shoot. There was no real interaction between the players and the screen, so saying it's a video game is a stretch.
Sounds kind of like when you point a laser at the wall and the cat hits it.
Yeah, it's kind of like what would happen is in the game, players would have light guns. This is the only way I could think of it working because they didn't have the tech back then. Mm-hmm. And they would point at the screen, they'd pull the trigger, and their light gun would shoot it, and someone would stop the film, and they would see where the light gun hit.
Hey there, everybody. This is post-production Hunum, 5 years in the future, recording this, after recording this with Scarlet McCaw. So actually, someone has recreated this game from 1913, and it basically works exactly how I said. The only difference is I think they used a real gun back then and not a light gun. So that's interesting, and I'm going to link that in the description below, so if you want to, go and check out the recreation of that game. Still not a video game. Suck it, internet nerds.
Now,
for the true origin of gaming.
The
very first game ever.
Birdie the Brain!
Also known as tic-tac-toe.
I bet some of you are confused. Birdie the Brain was a computer at the University of Toronto. Its tic-tac-toe program was mostly created by the mind of Joseph Cates. The computer itself was bought from the British firm Ferranti and modified to run tic-tac-toe. It, like the other tic-tac-toe, had a computer opponent. It's the very first video game.
And a king among video games it is.
I'm Scarlet McCaw.
And I'm your rappy host Hunum, hoping you've enjoyed this season of the Origins of Gaming.
We may be back next summer for more.
But until then, see you later.